The first thing Lee Jinho felt was cold. Not the sharp cold of winter wind or the bite of space, but a deep cold that seemed to reach into his bones. His eyes opened slowly, like heavy doors that had been sealed for years. Everything was white. Pure, clean white, that hurt to look at. Where was he? Jinho tried to move his arms, but something held them down. Soft restraints wrapped around his wrists and ankles. Tubes ran from his arms to machines that hummed quietly nearby. A mask covered his nose and mouth, feeding him air that tasted strange and metallic. His memory felt fuzzy, like trying to see through thick fog. The last clear thing he remembered was Mars Colony 7. He had been leading his squad on a routine patrol around the mining facilities. There had been reports of strange signals coming from the outer sectors. His team was supposed to check it out and report back. His team. Panic shot through Jinho as he remembered. Park Minho, his tech specialist. Kim Nari, their medic. Choi Daeho, the demolitions expert who could make explosives from spare parts. Where were they? Jinho forced his head to turn, fighting against the stiffness in his neck. The movement made him dizzy, but he pushed through it. To his left, he saw another white chamber just like his own. Through the clear walls, he could see a familiar face. Minho lay unconscious in an identical setup. Tubes ran from his arms to the same kind of machines. His chest rose and fell in the slow rhythm of deep sleep. But he was alive. Turning his head the other way, Jinho saw Nari and Daeho in their own chambers. All four of them were here, wherever here was. Relief flooded through him, followed quickly by anger. Someone had taken his entire squad. Someone was going to pay for that. The room they were in was unlike anything Jinho had ever seen. The walls curved in impossible ways, meeting the ceiling at angles that made his eyes water. Strange symbols covered every surface, glowing with a soft blue light. The floor beneath his chamber felt warm, as if heated from below. This was not human technology. A soft chime echoed through the room, and the symbols on the walls pulsed brighter. Jinho heard footsteps, but they sounded wrong. Too light, too quick, with an odd clicking sound mixed in. He closed his eyes and pretended to still be unconscious. Through his eyelashes, he watched as shapes moved past the walls of his chamber. They were tall, much taller than any human. Their bodies were thin and angular, with too many joints in their arms and legs. What he could see of their skin looked gray and smooth, like polished stone. But it was their faces that made his blood run cold. They had no faces as humans understood them. Instead, large compound eyes dominated their heads, like those of giant insects. Below the eyes, a series of small holes opened and closed in patterns that might have been breathing or speech. 3 of the creatures moved between the chambers, checking the machines and making notes on devices that looked like flat sheets of light. They moved with purpose, like doctors making their rounds, but Jinho knew these were not doctors trying to help him. One of the creatures stopped in front of his chamber. It tilted its head, studying him with those alien compound eyes. For a moment, Jinho thought it knew he was awake. His heart pounded, so loud he was sure the creature could hear it. But after a few seconds, the creature moved on. It went to Minho's chamber and did something to one of the machines. The humming changed pitch slightly. Then it moved to Nari's chamber and repeated the process. When the creatures finally left, Jinho waited several long minutes before opening his eyes fully. He tested the restraints holding him down. They were soft but strong, designed more for medical purposes than imprisonment. That gave him hope. The machines connected to him seemed to be monitoring his vital signs and feeding him nutrients through the tubes. If he was going to escape, he needed to do it without triggering any alarms. Jinho began working on the restraint, around his right wrist, using the flexibility he had gained from years of military training. It took almost an hour, but finally his right hand came free. Moving slowly and carefully, he removed the tubes from his arms and the mask from his face. The air in the chamber tasted clean but strange, with a faint metallic flavor that made his nose wrinkle. Standing up was harder than he expected. His legs felt weak, like he had been lying down for weeks or months. How long had he been unconscious? How far from home was he now? Jinho made his way to the wall of his chamber and found what looked like a control panel. The symbols meant nothing to him, but there had to be a way to open the door. He pressed several of the glowing symbols in different combinations. On his fifth try, the wall in front of him simply faded away, like mist in sunlight. Jinho stepped out into the larger room and immediately went to Minho's chamber. The same combination of symbols worked, and soon he was pulling the tubes from his friend's arms. Minho woke up coughing and confused. "Captain, where are we?" "I don't know yet," Jinho whispered, "but we're getting out of here. Help me wake the others." Within minutes, all 4 squad members were free and standing in the strange room. Nari checked each of them for injuries while Deho examined the alien technology with professional interest. "These machines are incredible," Deho whispered. "The power systems alone are decades ahead of anything we have." "Save the admiration for later," Jinho said. "Right now we need to figure out where we are and how to get home." Nari finished her examinations. "We're all healthy, but there are injection marks on everyone's arms. They've been running tests on us. The implications of that made everyone's blood run cold. They were not prisoners of war or kidnapping victims. They were laboratory specimens." "Captain," Minho said quietly, pointing to one of the walls, "look at this." Through a section of transparent wall, they could see into another room. It was filled with dozens of chambers just like the ones they had been in. Most were occupied by humans in various states of consciousness. Men, women, even some who looked like teenagers. All of them had the same tubes and monitoring equipment. "How many people are they holding?" Nari whispered. Before anyone could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. The symbols on the walls flashed red, and they could hear the clicking footsteps of their captors approaching from multiple directions. "Looks like they know we're awake," Jinho said, his military training taking over. "Everyone stay close. We're going to find a way out of here, and we're going to take as many of those people with us as possible." The awakening was over. The fight for survival was about to begin. The alarm sounds echoed through the corridors as Jinho led his team away from their prison chambers. The clicking footsteps of their alien captors grew louder, coming from at least 3 different directions. They needed to find somewhere to hide and plan their next move. "This way," Minho whispered, pointing to a narrow passage that glowed with dim blue light. "The airflow suggests it leads to a maintenance area." They moved quickly but quietly through the strange corridors. The walls here were the same curved design as their prison, but darker and more functional. Pipes and conduits ran along the ceiling, carrying unknown substances through the alien ship, because Jinho was now certain they were on a ship. The slight vibration in the floor and the way sounds carried told him they were inside a massive vessel moving through space. But where were they going, and how far from home were they already? They found a small chamber filled with mechanical equipment that hummed and clicked in steady rhythms. It seemed to be some kind of life support or power distribution center. More importantly, it appeared to be automated. No aliens were likely to visit here regularly. "Everyone sit down," Jinho ordered quietly. "We need to think through our situation." Minho immediately went to work examining the alien equipment. His neural implants, standard for all military tech specialists, began interfacing with the strange systems. His eyes glowed with data streams as he worked to understand the alien technology. "The good news is that these systems use quantum processing similar to our own," he reported. "The bad news is that the security protocols are unlike anything I've ever seen. Give me some time and I think I can crack into their networks." While Minho worked, Nari examined the injection sites on everyone's arms more carefully. She found tiny monitoring devices embedded under their skin, so small they were almost invisible. "They've been tracking our biological responses to everything," she explained. "Heart rate, brain activity, hormone levels, even genetic markers. Whatever they were doing to us, they were being very thorough about recording the results." Deho studied the construction of the chamber they were hiding in. He ran his hands along the walls and ceiling, testing the strength of different materials. "The metal they use is incredibly strong, but it has a specific resonance frequency," he said. "If I can find the right tools, I might be able to weaken key structural points. But I need to understand more about how this ship is built." Jinho listened to his team's reports while formulating a plan. They were trapped on an alien vessel with no weapons and no way to contact help. But they had advantages too. They were trained soldiers, and their captors clearly didn't expect them to be awake and organized. Minho, how long before you can access their computer systems? He asked. Maybe 6 hours for basic access, 12 for anything useful, Minho replied, still focused on the alien interfaces. Nari, what can you tell me about these creatures from a medical standpoint? Based on what I observed, they're insectoid but highly evolved. Those compound eyes suggest they see differently than we do, possibly in different light spectrums. The breathing holes indicate they might be sensitive to airborne toxins, and the way they moved suggests they're not built for physical combat. Deho, if we needed to disable part of this ship, where would you start? Power distribution centers, like this one. Take out enough of them and whole sections of the ship would shut down. But I'd need better tools and more time to study their systems. Before Jinho could respond, they heard footsteps in the corridor outside. But these weren't the clicking sounds of their alien captors. These were human footsteps, and they sounded like someone running. Jinho moved to the chamber entrance and peered out carefully. A young woman in a torn jumpsuit was moving quickly through the corridor, looking over her shoulder with fear. She wore the uniform of a colonial mining engineer. Hey, Jinho called out softly. Over here. The woman spun around, ready to run. Again, but stopped when she saw him. You're human, she gasped. Are you real? Some of the others said they saw humans walking around free, but I thought it was the drugs making me hallucinate. We're real and we're getting out of here, Jinho said. What's your name? Song Hana. I was working on Europa Station when they took me. How long have I been here? I don't know yet. Come inside and tell us what you know about this place. Hana joined them in the maintenance chamber. Her story was both helpful and terrifying. She had been awake for several days, having escaped from her chamber during a power fluctuation. In that time, she had explored parts of the ship and observed their captors. They call themselves collectors, she explained. I heard them talking in the common areas. They're not the only species on this ship. There are others, all working together on these experiments. And we're not the only humans they have. I've seen dozens of chambers filled with people from different colonies. What kind of experiments? Nari asked. Pain tolerance, problem solving under stress, reaction to different chemicals and environments. They seem to be studying how humans respond to various forms of pressure and threat. The implications were clear to everyone. This wasn't random experimentation. The aliens were studying human weaknesses and capabilities for a specific purpose. There's more, Hana continued. I overheard them saying something about reaching the analysis center in 6 days. Whatever data they've collected from us, they're planning to deliver it somewhere important. Jinho felt a chill run down his spine. If this ship reached its destination with data about human vulnerabilities, it could spell disaster for all human colonies. Then we have 6 days to stop them, he said. Minho, I need access to their systems faster than 12 hours. Nari, start thinking about ways we might be able to affect their biology. Deho, find me a way to cause some serious damage to this ship. And Hana, you're going to help us map out this vessel and locate the other prisoners. You want to fight them? Hana asked, looking uncertain. No, Jinho replied. I want to beat them. There's a difference. Over the next several hours, the team worked with focused intensity. Minho made breakthrough after breakthrough in accessing the alien computer systems. He discovered that the ship was called the Harvest of Understanding and was indeed heading for a major research station. More importantly, he found the ship's crew roster and layout. The collectors numbered about 200, supported by automated systems throughout most of the vessel. The ship was divided into sections, with the experimental areas taking up nearly 40% of the available space. Captain, I found something else, Minho said, his voice tight with anger. This isn't the only ship. There's an entire fleet conducting similar operations. They've been studying dozens of species, all apparently in preparation for something they call the Great Expansion. An invasion, Jinho said grimly. They're planning to invade everyone's territory, and they want to know exactly how to defeat each species. It was Nari who suggested their first real offensive action. She had been studying the biological data the aliens had collected, and she noticed a pattern. "They're most active during what corresponds to our daytime hours," she explained, "and based on their physiology, I think they might be vulnerable to certain frequencies of sound or light. If we could create a disruption during their active period, we might be able to catch them off guard." "What kind of disruption?" Daeho asked. "The kind where we turn their own equipment against them," Jinho said, a plan forming in his mind. "They want to study human responses to stress and threat? Let's give them a demonstration they'll never forget." The opportunity came 18 hours later. A group of 3 collectors arrived for routine maintenance of the life support systems in their section. They moved with the casual confidence of beings who had never been challenged by their test subjects. Jinho and his team were ready for them. The attack was swift and coordinated. Minho had rigged the lighting system to strobe at frequencies that disoriented the collectors' compound eyes. Nari had synthesized an aerosol compound that interfered with their respiratory systems. Daeho used improvised weapons made from maintenance tools, and Jinho led the assault with the tactical precision that had made him a squad leader in the first place. The 3 collectors never had a chance. Within minutes, they were unconscious and secured. More importantly, the humans had captured their communication devices and access codes. "Phase 1 complete," Jinho announced to his team. "Now we start learning everything they know, and we begin planning Phase 2. "Which is?" Hana asked. "We turn this research ship into our own personal war zone," Jinho replied. "And we show these collectors exactly what happens when humans decide to stop being test subjects and start being soldiers." 3 days had passed since their first successful attack on the collectors. Jinho's small team had grown to 15 humans, all rescued from various experimental chambers throughout the ship. Each new rescue brought more intelligence about their situation and more skills to their growing resistance. The maintenance chamber had become their command center. Minho had successfully tapped into the ship's communication networks, giving them access to real-time information about collector activities. The aliens were starting to realize that something was wrong, but they hadn't yet grasped the full scope of the human uprising. "Captain, you need to see this," Minho said, his face pale as he studied the data streams flowing through his neural implants. "I've accessed their main database. This ship is just one of 47 vessels in their research fleet, and the data they've been collecting isn't just about humans." Jinho leaned over to look at the translated information on Minho's portable display. The scope of the collector operation was staggering. They had been systematically studying every known intelligent species in this part of the galaxy, cataloging weaknesses and developing strategies for conquest. "How long have they been doing this?" asked Dr. Yusumi, a xenobiologist they had rescued from the medical research section. "According to their records, over 50 years, Minho replied. "They call it the Great Study. Once they finish gathering data from all species, they plan to begin what they call the Great Expansion, a coordinated invasion of every inhabited system." The rescued humans absorbed this information with grim determination. They weren't just fighting for their own freedom anymore. They were potentially the only people in the galaxy who knew about this threat and were in a position to do something about it. "We need to get word back to human space," said Commander Park In-ho, a military officer they had found in the leadership study section. "The colonies need to prepare for what's coming." "First, we need to make sure we survive long enough to warn anyone," Jinho replied. "And we need to gather as much intelligence as possible. Minho, what can you tell me about the ship's defenses?" "They have automated security systems in critical areas, but most of the ship relies on the assumption that their test subjects are helpless. The collectors themselves aren't warriors. They're scientists and technicians. Their entire society seems to be built around research and analysis rather than combat." That gave Jinho an idea. The collectors thought like researchers, which meant they were predictable. They followed protocols and procedures, and protocols could be exploited. "Nari, how are you coming with the biological warfare research?" Kim. Nari had set up a makeshift laboratory in an abandoned storage area. Using captured collector medical equipment, she had been analyzing tissue samples and biological data from their captors. "I've made some interesting discoveries," she reported. The collectors have very specialized immune systems, probably because they've lived in sterile environments for generations. They're extremely vulnerable to biological agents that would barely affect humans. I think I can synthesize something that will incapacitate them without causing permanent harm. Why not? Permanent harm? Asked Choi Dae-ho. After what they've done to us. Because we might need them alive to operate their technology, Jin-ho answered. And because we're better than they are. Dae-ho had been conducting his own research into the ship's structural weaknesses. He had identified several critical systems that, if damaged in the right sequence, could give the humans control over entire sections of the vessel. The power distribution network is their weak point, he explained. Take out the main conduits in the right order, and we can isolate different parts of the ship. Force them to come to us instead of letting them coordinate their response. Show me, Jin-ho said. Dae-ho had created a three-dimensional map of the ship using data from Min-ho's computer access and reconnaissance from their rescued teammates. The vessel was enormous, nearly 2 kilometers long, but its design followed logical principles that could be exploited. If we hit these 6 power nodes simultaneously, we can black out the entire research section, Dae-ho explained. The collectors would have to choose between restoring power to their experiments or maintaining security systems. Either way, we gain an advantage. How many people would we need for simultaneous strikes? At least 12, working in coordinated teams, and we'd need better weapons than improvised tools. That was when Song Hana made her contribution to the planning. During her earlier explorations of the ship, she had discovered something the others had missed. There's an armory, she announced. Not weapons for fighting, but tools for specimen control, stun devices, restraint systems, even some kind of neural disruptors. If we could get access to those. Where? Jin-ho asked immediately. Section C7, near the main laboratory complex. But it's heavily secured, and there are always collectors in that area. Jin-ho studied the ship schematics that Dae-ho had created. Section C7 was deep in collector territory, but it was also close to several critical systems that they would need to control eventually. We're going to take it, he decided. But not just the armory. We're going to take the entire section, turn it into our forward base, and rescue everyone we can in the process. Over the next 2 days, they planned the most ambitious operation yet attempted by any human prisoners on the ship. It would require precise timing, coordinated attacks, and a level of cooperation that would test their growing organization. The assault began at what the collectors considered their midday period, when most of their staff was active and engaged in routine work. Jin-ho had divided his people into 4 teams, each with specific objectives. Team 1, led by Commander Park, would create a diversion in Section A3, drawing collector security forces away from their main target. Team 2, under Dae-ho's command, would strike the power distribution centers to create confusion and limit the aliens' ability to coordinate their response. Team 3, with Nari in charge, would deploy her biological agents in the ship's ventilation system, incapacitating collectors throughout the target area. And Team 4, led by Jin-ho himself, would seize the armory and begin liberating prisoners from the nearby experimental chambers. The operation began exactly as planned. Park's diversion drew nearly half the security forces away from Section C7. Dae-ho's power strikes created rolling blackouts that left the collectors working in emergency lighting, and Nari's biological agents proved devastatingly effective, causing collectors to collapse within minutes of exposure. But it was Team 4's assault on the armory that proved most crucial. The collector guards, already weakened by the biological agents and confused by the power failures, offered little resistance to the coordinated human attack. Within 30 minutes, Jin-ho's team had secured an arsenal of alien technology and begun the systematic liberation of human prisoners from nearby chambers. They freed 43 people, including several military officers, colonial administrators, and technical specialists. More importantly, they established a secure base of operations in the heart of collector territory. The armory became their weapons depot. The experimental chambers became housing for rescued humans, and the laboratory facilities gave them access to advanced alien technology. But the greatest victory was psychological. For the first time since their capture, the humans had taken the offensive and won. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were fighting back, and they were winning. "Captain," Minho reported as the immediate aftermath of the operation settled down, "I'm picking up increased communication traffic between this ship and the rest of their fleet. I think they're starting to realize this isn't just a minor security problem." "Good," Jinho replied, watching as the newly freed humans were organized into work teams and briefed on their situation. "Let them worry. We're just getting started." "Doctor," Yusumi approached with a tablet displaying analysis results from the captured laboratory equipment. "Captain, you need to see this. I've been analyzing the data they collected from all the different species they've studied. There are patterns that suggest ways we might be able to help other species resist the coming invasion. Explain. Each species has unique strengths that the collectors have cataloged as weaknesses, but if those species work together, combining their different advantages, they could be much more effective against the collector invasion than any single species alone." Jinho studied the data, seeing the implications immediately. The collectors were planning to conquer each species separately, using their specific weaknesses against them. But if those species were warned and worked together— "Minho, can you access their communication systems enough to send messages to other ships in their fleet?" "Possibly." "Why?" "Because we're not just going to escape from this ship," Jinho announced to the growing group of human survivors. "We're going to turn this entire research fleet into a liberation force, and then we're going to take the fight directly to whoever sent them." The transformation from victims to warriors was complete. Now began the transformation from warriors to liberators. The collectors had finally realized what they were facing. The ship that had once hummed with orderly research activity now echoed with alarm signals and emergency announcements in their clicking language. 5 days after the first human escape, nearly a third of the vessel was under human control. Jinho stood in what had once been the ship's secondary research center, now converted into the command center for the human resistance. Displays showing ship schematics and communication intercepts covered the walls, while rescued humans worked at stations throughout the room. "Captain, we're getting reports from reconnaissance teams in sections D through G," reported Lieutenant Cho Nara, a military intelligence officer they had freed 3 days earlier. "The collectors are implementing something they call Protocol 7. They're sealing off entire sections and evacuating their personnel to secure areas. Which means they're preparing for something bigger than just trying to recapture us," Jinho replied. He had been studying collector psychology for days now, learning to think like his enemies. "Minho, what are you seeing in their communications?" Park Minho looked up from his console, where streams of translated alien communications scrolled past at high speed. "They're in contact with someone called the Prime Researcher. From what I can gather, this individual has absolute authority over the ship and is currently en route to deal with the specimen contamination." "Specimen contamination," Dr. Yusumi repeated with disgust. "That's what they call our rebellion." "Let them call it whatever they want," said Commander Park In-ho. "What matters is what they plan to do about it." That question was answered an hour later when the ship's main communication system activated throughout all sections, still under collector control. The voice that spoke was different from the usual collector communications. Deeper, more resonant, and filled with an authority that made the other aliens' clicking seem like whispers. "Specimens of species designation, Human Prime," the voice said in heavily accented but understandable English. "I am Prime Researcher Veltar, commander of this vessel and overseer of your study protocols. Your recent actions constitute a severe breach of experimental parameters." Jinho activated the communication system in their captured section. If the Prime Researcher wanted to talk, he would get a response. "This is Captain Lee Jinho of the Human Colonial Defense Forces," he replied. "We're not your specimens anymore. We're prisoners of war, and we demand to be treated according to the standards of civilized behavior." There was a long pause before the alien voice responded. "You misunderstand your situation, Captain. You are research subjects in a study of critical importance to the advancement of galactic civilization. Your cooperation is not optional." "Then you misunderstand humans," Jinho shot back. We don't cooperate with kidnappers and torturers, we fight them. Another pause, longer this time. When the prime researcher spoke again, his tone had changed. There was something that might have been curiosity mixed with the authority. Your species exhibits greater organizational capability than our preliminary studies indicated. This is valuable data. However, your continued resistance threatens the integrity of research being conducted on other specimen groups aboard this vessel. The threat was clear, but Jinho had expected it. If you're talking about the other humans you're holding, they're under our protection now. If you're talking about non-human prisoners, they're under our protection too. Anyone who wants to be free can join us. That is not acceptable. If you do not return to your designated containment areas within 6 hours, we will be forced to implement emergency sterilization protocols for contaminated sections. The communication cut off, leaving the humans to contemplate what emergency sterilization protocols might mean. They didn't have to wait long to find out. Kim Nari's biological monitors, set up throughout the human-controlled sections, began detecting unusual chemical signatures in the air circulation system. She ran quick analyses and discovered that the collectors were pumping a powerful sedative gas into areas under human control. Everyone to emergency stations, Jinho ordered over their internal communication system. Seal all air vents and switch to emergency oxygen supplies. The humans had prepared for this possibility. Choi Daeho's teams had modified the life support systems in their sections, allowing them to isolate their air supply from the main ship systems. Within minutes, the sedative gas was being filtered out and replaced with clean air. But the gas attack was just the beginning. Over the next several hours, the collectors implemented increasingly desperate measures to regain control of their ship. They cut power to human-controlled sections, only to discover that Daeho had rigged independent power supplies. They tried to flood certain areas with coolant, only to find that the humans had already rerouted the relevant systems. Most telling of all, they attempted to use their automated security systems against the human positions. But Minho had long since taken control of those systems, turning the ship's own defenses against its original crew. They're running out of options, Minho reported as he tracked the collectors' increasingly frantic communications. The prime researcher is demanding updates every few minutes now. I think he's starting to panic. What about the other ships in their fleet? Asked Dr. Yu. That's the interesting part. The prime researcher hasn't reported our rebellion to Fleet Command yet. I think he's hoping to resolve the situation before his superiors find out that he lost control of his research vessel. This gave Jinho an idea that was both audacious and potentially decisive. If the prime researcher was trying to hide their rebellion from his superiors, it meant that losing control of a research ship was considered a serious failure in collector culture. How long before this ship reaches their research station? He asked. According to their navigation data, about 36 hours, Minho replied. And how long would it take to send a message to Fleet Command? From our current position, about 8 hours for a response. Jinho gathered his senior staff around the main display table. The ship schematic showed the clear division between human-controlled areas in green and collector-controlled areas in red. The humans now controlled nearly half the vessel, including critical systems. We're going to force the prime researcher to make a choice, he announced. Either he deals with us as equals, or we make sure his superiors know exactly how badly he's failed. The plan was psychological warfare on a scale that would have impressed human military strategists. Instead of trying to capture more of the ship, the humans began systematically demonstrating just how completely they had compromised collector security. Minho sent false data reports to the ship's automated systems, making it appear that multiple experiments had been contaminated or destroyed. Nari released harmless but detectable biological agents into collector-controlled areas, forcing them to implement expensive decontamination procedures. Daeho caused minor but visible damage to non-critical systems throughout the ship, making it clear that the humans could have caused much worse damage if they had chosen to. But the masterstroke came when they gained access to the ship's main laboratory and discovered the prime researcher's personal research project. According to the files Minho decoded, Veltar had been conducting unauthorized experiments on several species, including some that were specifically forbidden by collector research protocols. He's not just afraid of losing control of the ship, Dr. Yu realized as she studied the data. He's afraid that an investigation of this incident will expose his illegal research. Which gives us leverage, Commander Park added. If we threaten to expose him, he might be willing to negotiate. But Jinho had a more ambitious plan in mind. We're not going to threaten to expose him. We're going to offer to help him cover up his failures in exchange for something much more valuable, which is information about the entire collector research program, ship locations, research station coordinates, timetables for the Great Expansion, everything we need to warn the galaxy about what's coming. The next communication from the Prime Researcher came 6 hours later. His tone had changed again, becoming more cautious and less authoritative. Captain Jinho, I propose a cessation of hostilities while we discuss terms for resolving this situation. I'm listening, Jinho replied. Your species has demonstrated capabilities that were not anticipated by our preliminary studies. This data is valuable, but it cannot be properly analyzed under current conditions. I am prepared to offer improved accommodations for your people in exchange for cooperation with ongoing research. Not interested, Jinho said immediately. But I have a counter-proposal. We help you explain to your superiors how your research mission was compromised by external factors beyond your control. In exchange, you provide us with complete information about collector operations in this sector. There was a very long pause before the alien replied. That would not be possible. Such information is classified beyond my authority to share. Then, you'd better hope your superiors are understanding about research failures, Jinho said calmly, because in about 24 hours when we reach that research station, they're going to have a lot of questions about why half your ship is under human control. The communication cut off again, but this time Jinho knew he had won a crucial victory. The Prime Researcher was trapped between his fear of his. The Prime Researcher's response came at what the humans had designated as 300 hours ship time. Alarms began blaring throughout the vessel, but these were different from the security alerts they had grown accustomed to. These were emergency evacuation signals. Captain, they're jettisoning the outer research pods, Lieutenant Cho Nara reported from the sensor station. Sections containing at least 200 human prisoners are being ejected into space. Jinho felt his blood turn to ice. The collectors weren't just abandoning their experiments, they were committing mass murder to deny the humans any chance of rescue. All teams to emergency stations, he ordered over the ship-wide communication system that Minho had rigged in human-controlled areas. Daeho, I need those power distribution attacks now. Cut off their ability to jettison any more sections. Already on it, Captain, Daeho replied from his position at the ship's main power control center. But they're operating on independent systems for the ejection mechanisms. I can't stop all of them. Through the viewports of their command center, they could see the horror unfolding outside. Research pods the size of small buildings were being pushed away from the main ship by mechanical arms, their occupants still trapped inside. The pods had basic life support, but they were never designed for independent survival in deep space. How many? Jinho asked quietly. I'm reading at least 6 pods ejected so far, Minho reported, his voice tight with anger. Each one contains between 20 and 40 prisoners from various species, not just humans. The magnitude of what the Prime Researcher was willing to do to save his own career hit everyone in the command center. This wasn't just about human rebellion anymore. The collectors were willing to murder hundreds of innocent beings to maintain their research schedule. That's it, Commander Park said grimly. No more negotiation. No more trying to minimize casualties. They just declared war on every decent being in the galaxy. Jinho nodded, feeling the same cold fury settling over him that he had experienced during the worst battles of his military career. But this time, the stakes were higher than any single battle or campaign. This was about the survival of civilized behavior in a galaxy that apparently had too little of it. All units, this is Captain Jinho, he announced over their communication network. The collectors have just murdered hundreds of prisoners in cold blood. From this moment forward, we are no longer trying to escape from this ship. We are taking it completely. No collector walks free until every surviving prisoner on this vessel is liberated. The transformation from rebellion to total war was instantaneous. Human teams that had been playing defensive positions suddenly went on the attack. Deho's engineering teams began systematic destruction of collector life support systems. Nari's biological warfare program shifted from incapacitation to something much more serious. Minho's electronic warfare expanded from surveillance to active sabotage of critical ship functions, but it was the psychological impact on the human prisoners that proved most decisive. Word of the mass murder spread quickly through their ranks, turning even the most cautious survivors into dedicated fighters. People who had been scientists, miners, merchants, and farmers just days earlier began thinking and acting like soldiers. Dr. Yu Sumi, the quiet xenobiologist, approached Jinho with a proposal that demonstrated just how far they had all traveled from their original selves. "Captain, I've been studying the ship's waste disposal systems," she said with the same calm tone she might have used to discuss research data. "If we introduce certain biological agents into their water recycling plants, we can make life very uncomfortable for the collectors without causing permanent harm. But if they continue to murder prisoners, we can make those agents much more potent." "Do it," Jinho replied without hesitation. The battle for the ship intensified over the next 12 hours. The collectors, led by the increasingly desperate Prime researcher, tried every tactic they could conceive of to regain control. They flooded sections with toxic gases, only to discover that humans had already sealed themselves into protective areas. They attempted to retake critical systems with armed security teams, only to find that humans had rigged those areas with improvised explosives. Most critically, they tried to contact the research station they were approaching, requesting immediate military assistance. But Minho had anticipated this move and had taken control of the ship's main communication array hours earlier. "I'm feeding them false status reports," he explained to the senior staff. "As far as the research station knows, this ship is approaching, on schedule with no problems. They won't realize what's happened until we're in docking range." "And then?" asked Commander Park. "Then we do to their research station what we did to this ship," Jinho replied. "Except this time, we're not starting as helpless prisoners. We're starting as an armed invasion force with detailed intelligence about their operations." The turning point in the shipboard war came when the humans captured the Prime researcher himself. Veltar had been conducting a personal inspection of the remaining collector-controlled areas when one of Nari's biological agents overcame his protective systems. He was found unconscious in a corridor by a human patrol team and brought to the command center. When he regained consciousness, the Prime researcher found himself in a position that no collector had ever experienced, completely at the mercy of their former test subjects. "Prime researcher Veltar," Jinho said formally as the alien was secured in a chair designed for collector physiology. "You are now a prisoner of war. According to the laws of civilized warfare, you are entitled to humane treatment and protection from harm, unlike the treatment you gave to your prisoners." The collector's compound eyes focused on Jinho with what might have been surprise. "You intend to interrogate me?" "I intend to offer you a choice," Jinho replied. "You can provide us with complete information about collector military capabilities, research station defenses, and the timeline for the Great Expansion. In exchange, when this is over, you will be repatriated to your people with a full report of how you were treated during your captivity. And if I refuse, then you'll remain our prisoner until we can turn you over to representatives of all the species your people have been studying for extermination. I imagine they'll have some pointed questions for you." Veltar was silent for several minutes, processing this offer. Finally, he spoke in the measured tones of someone making a calculated decision. "Your species continues to demonstrate behaviors that contradict our research models," he said. "This itself is valuable data. I will provide the information you request, but I require assurance that this data will be used defensively rather than for aggressive expansion." "You're worried about humans becoming conquerors like your people?" Jinho asked. "I am concerned about disrupting the natural order of galactic development. The Great Expansion is intended to bring unity and efficiency to chaotic systems. Through slavery and murder," Dr. Yu interjected angrily. "Through organization and proper resource allocation." Veltar replied with what seemed like genuine conviction. Lesser species require guidance to reach their potential. Jinho felt a chill as he realized the prime researcher actually believed what he was saying. The collectors weren't evil in the way humans understood evil. They were something potentially worse, absolutely convinced of their own righteousness. Prime researcher, let me explain something about human nature, Jinho said carefully. We don't accept guidance from people who kidnap our children and conduct experiments on our families. We fight such people, and we're very good at fighting. Over the next 6 hours, as the ship approached the research station, Veltar provided detailed intelligence about collector operations. The information was both invaluable and terrifying. The Great Expansion was scheduled to begin in less than 2 standard years. 47 research fleets were currently gathering data on every known intelligent species in the galaxy. Once the analysis was complete, synchronized invasion forces would strike every inhabited system simultaneously. The research station they were approaching was one of 12 major facilities where all collected data was processed and turned into military intelligence. It was defended by automated systems but had minimal military presence, since no one had ever successfully escaped from a collector research vessel before. Captain, we're receiving docking instructions from the station, Minho reported. They're directing us to Research Bay 7 for data download and specimen transfer. Perfect, Jinho replied. That's exactly where we want to be. The final preparations for their assault on the research station took place during the last hour of their approach. Every human on the ship had been organized into specialized teams with specific objectives. They would have one chance to capture the station intact, and failure would mean not just their own deaths, but the continuation of the collector research program. As the ship entered the docking bay, Jinho looked around at the people who had transformed, from helpless prisoners into an effective military force in just 8 days. Scientists had become strategists, miners had become soldiers, and all of them had become something the collectors had never anticipated. Free beings willing to fight for their freedom and the freedom of others. All teams prepare for deployment, he announced. Remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves anymore, we're fighting for every species in this galaxy. Don't let them down. The research vessel, Harvest of Understanding, settled into its docking cradle for what the station personnel believed would be a routine data transfer. Instead, it had become the delivery system for the galaxy's first strike against the collector expansion. The war for galactic freedom was about to begin in earnest. The research station was massive, easily 10 times the size of the ship that now rested in its docking bay. Through the viewports, Jinho could see multiple other research vessels in various states of maintenance and resupply. Each one represented thousands of prisoners from dozens of species, all awaiting processing by the collector analysis systems. Captain, I'm reading at least 15 other ships in this facility, Lieutenant Chonara reported from the sensor station. If each one has a prisoner complement similar to ours, we're looking at potentially 20,000 captives in this station alone. The magnitude of the rescue operation they were about to attempt was staggering, but Jinho had learned something important during their rebellion aboard the research ship. Impossible missions became possible when you had people willing to fight for something bigger than themselves. Minho, what's the status on their communication systems? I've been monitoring their transmissions for the past hour. This is definitely a routine docking for them. They're expecting us to begin data transfer within the next 30 minutes, followed by specimen transfer for detailed analysis. How long before they realize we're not following standard procedures? Maybe an hour after we're supposed to begin, assuming they stick to their usual protocols. That gave them a narrow window to establish control over critical station systems before the collectors realized what was happening. Jinho had divided their force into 6 teams, each with specific objectives that had to be achieved almost simultaneously. Team Alpha, led by Commander Park, would seize the station's command center and communication arrays. Team Beta, under Choi Daeho's command, would take control of power generation and life support systems. Team Gamma, with Dr. Yu in charge, would secure the main data storage facilities and begin copying everything they could about Collector. Operations. Teams Delta and Echo, led by rescued military personnel, would begin the systematic liberation of prisoners from the other research ships. And Team Omega, which Jinho would lead personally, would capture the station's leadership and turn them into sources of intelligence about the broader collector network. All teams, final equipment check, Jinho announced over their communication, a network. Remember, we've been underestimated by these people before. Let's make sure they never make that mistake again. The assault began exactly as planned. The station's docking protocols allowed the research ship's crew to disembark for routine maintenance and resupply. What the collector technicians weren't expecting was for that crew to consist entirely of armed humans with detailed knowledge of collector psychology and technology. Team Alpha reached the command center before the station personnel realized anything was wrong. The collector supervisors found themselves facing creatures they had studied extensively, but never really understood. Commander Park's team used Nari's biological agents to incapacitate resistance while taking control of the station's critical systems. Team Beta encountered more resistance as they moved through the station's engineering sections, but Daiho had prepared for this. His people used knowledge gained from their shipboard rebellion to quickly disable collector defensive systems and turn their own technology against them. Meanwhile, Team Gamma made the most shocking discovery of the entire operation. The station's data storage facilities contained not just information about current research programs, but historical records of the collector expansion going back over 3 centuries. "Captain, you need to see this," Dr. Yu transmitted from the data center. "The collectors have been doing this for hundreds of years. They've already conquered and absorbed at least 30 different species. We're not looking at a planned invasion. We're looking at the continuation of an ongoing conquest that's been happening for generations." This revelation changed everything. The humans weren't just fighting to prevent a future invasion. They were fighting to stop an ongoing genocide that had already claimed entire civilizations, but it was Teams Delta and Echo that made the discovery that would define their victory. As they began liberating prisoners from the other research vessels, they found representatives of species that the collectors claimed to have already conquered and absorbed. "These people have been fighting the collectors for decades," reported Team Delta leader Captain Kim Jong-soo over the communication network. "Some of them have military experience with collector tactics, and they all want to join our fight." Within 6 hours, the humans had accomplished something unprecedented in recent galactic history. They had captured a major collector research facility intact with all its data, technology, and personnel. More importantly, they had liberated thousands of prisoners representing dozens of different species, many of whom had been fighting the collectors long before humans even knew they existed. The station's command center had become a United Nations, of sorts, with representatives from multiple species working together to understand the full scope of the collector threat and plan their response. "The key insight," explained Vec Larn, a representative of a species called the Thornbacks who had been fighting the collectors for 40 years, "is that they cannot adapt quickly to coordinated resistance. Their entire strategy depends on conquering species individually, using each one's specific weaknesses against them. But when multiple species work together," added Dr. Yu, "their combined strengths can overcome any individual weakness the collectors have catalogued." Jinho found himself in the unexpected position of coordinating not just human resistance, but a multi-species alliance that was rapidly becoming the most effective anti-collector force in the galaxy. The strategic intelligence they had captured was being analyzed by experts from dozens of different civilizations, each contributing unique perspectives on how to interpret and use the data. The most significant breakthrough came when Minho, working with collector computer systems and assisted by technical specialists from 3 other species, managed to access the central communication network connecting all collector research facilities. "Captain, I can reach every collector installation in this sector," he reported with barely contained excitement. "We can coordinate simultaneous strikes on their entire research infrastructure." "How many installations are we talking about?" "At least 200 facilities, including 12 major research stations like this one. If we can organize coordinated attacks on all of them simultaneously, we can liberate hundreds of thousands of prisoners and capture the complete database of collector knowledge about every species in the galaxy." The plan that emerged from these discussions was breathtaking in its scope and ambition. Instead of simply escaping and warning their respective governments about the collector threat, the liberated prisoners would become the core of a galaxy-wide resistance movement. Each species would return to their home systems not as refugees, but as military advisors with complete intelligence about collector capabilities and plans. The captured technology would be reverse-engineered and adapted for defensive use, and the collector research network would be systematically destroyed, preventing the completion of their great expansion plans. But first, they had to deal with the immediate threat of collector military forces that would inevitably be sent to investigate the loss of contact with the research station. How long before they send ships to check on this facility? Jinho asked Prime Researcher Veltar, who had become surprisingly cooperative once he realized the scope of what the humans had accomplished. Standard protocol requires status reports every 72 hours, the collector replied. When this facility fails to report, military vessels will be dispatched to investigate. Estimated arrival time would be 6 to 8 days. Then we have 6 days to turn this research station into a fortress and coordinate our attacks on the other facilities, Commander Park said. Not just a fortress, Jinho corrected. We're going to turn it into the headquarters for the Galactic Liberation Army. Over the following days, as representatives of dozens of species worked together to plan their war against the collectors, Jinho found himself reflecting on how much had changed since he first woke up in that white chamber. He had begun as a captured soldier trying to protect his squad. Now he was coordinating the largest military alliance in galactic history. The transformation was complete, but it was also just beginning. The research station that had been built to analyze and catalog the weaknesses of free species had become the birthplace of their united resistance. The collectors had created the very thing that would destroy them, a gathering place where the galaxy's diverse peoples could learn from each other and combine their strengths. Captain, Lieutenant Chonara reported as the final preparations for the coordinated attacks were completed. All teams report ready. 217 separate operations will begin simultaneously in 6 hours. Jinho